John, I just got my second shot up in Culpeper. Are you guys running that, or is that a health department center?
It's sort of a teamwork thing, Jack. It's our EMS guys are helping get the shots and set the appointments, but it's being run through the health department, the hospital.
Okay, interesting.
I got mine this morning there too. At the middle school?
Yes.
Hello, folks.
Hey, Bob.
Well, you know, the guy who says he doesn't know what day of the week it is, I wasn't trying to quit one meeting early. Patrick called me, and when it was 1 o'clock and he called, of course, it hit me like a ton of bricks, but I started at 5:30 this morning, and my farmers are due Monday, and I'm always behind this time of year. So anyway, this is always a tough meeting for me, and it's the last one I'll be heading up, so it's not a concern going forward. Sorry to keep you folks waiting. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order, and I'll say good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February meeting of the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission, our first in 2021, and as I alluded, my final one as chair. Due to the nature of the declared state of emergency due to COVID-19 that makes it impractical or unsafe to assemble in a single location, and acknowledging that the purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the commission, we are conducting this meeting electronically via Zoom with audio and video of the proceedings available on YouTube for interested parties during and after the meeting. Patrick, would you review the guidelines for conducting the commission meeting via electronic means?
Yes, sir. When the governor has declared a state of emergency in accordance with section 44-146.17 of the Code of Virginia, it may become necessary for the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission to meet by electronic means as outlined in section 2.2-3708.2 of the Code of Virginia as amended. In such cases, we'll follow the following procedure. The Regional Commission will give notice to the public in the best available method given the nature of the emergency. And the notice will be given contemporaneously as that to the Regional Commission. That was done by email to local news media and anyone else that signed up for agendas. We will also make arrangements for public access to such meeting. That's being done again through the YouTube stream, which also will allow for, public comment was also allowed for email prior to the meeting.
Okay.
And then the last thing, if I might, Bob, really just
go ahead.
we have to do is within the minutes, we will also include the fact that the meeting was held electronically. So,
okay, right. Sounds good. Unfortunately, we've gotten used to this. I can repeat what we just said, I'm sure, after hearing it for the last year, but you do what you have to do always. Before calling roll, I'd like to welcome two new members to the commission today, Mr. Gary Deal, Chair of the Culpeper County Board of Supervisors, and Ms. Debbie Dunahee, Chair of the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors. I'm very pleased to have each of you on the commission with us, and we all look forward to working with you, hopefully in person soon. Patrick, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ashby, Mr. Butler.
Here.
Mayor Catlin, Mayor Coyne.
Here.
Mr. Crozier.
Here.
Mr. Curry, Mr. Deal.
Here.
Ms. Donahue.
Here.
Mr. Eggertson.
Here.
Mr. Hively. Thought I saw Chris. Mr. Hobbs.
Here.
Ms. Hoffman.
Here.
Mayor Lamar. Mr. McCullough.
Here.
Mayor Roby. Ms. Schaefer.
Here.
Mayor Sisson, Ms. Taylor,
Here.
Mr. Voorhees, Mr. Woods.
I'm here.
You do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Patrick. Before I go forward, Patrick, I'm sure you have it right, but Madam Chair of Rappahannock County, I have a thing about pronouncing people's names right. I think I said Donahue and Patrick said Donahue. Would you say your last name so we'll always know exactly what it is?
I typically hear Donahue, and that is fine with me.
Okay, that's what we'll use then. I didn't want to stab at it. I wanted to say it right.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Next thing we need to do, and really the first thing we need to do, is approve the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda that was distributed prior to the meeting? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Patrick, do you have two there?
I do have Ms. Hoffman and Ms. Taylor.
Okay. The second one is the second. I won't ask for a second with two responses for the motion. Any discussion? Then all in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, folks, we have an agenda. Next section is for public comment. Patrick, were any comments from the public received ahead of this meeting?
We did not receive any public comments before the meeting.
Thank you. Then we'll move ahead to presentations. For today, we have none. So we'll move to the minutes from the December 9th meeting, which were included in your packets. Are there any changes requested? And if not, I'd ask for a motion. Go ahead. Someone. Was that a comment or just some noise?
I think it was just some feedback. I think we're good now.
Okay. All right. Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the December minutes. Is there any discussion? Okay, then all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Opposed,
I
say
have
nay. Go ahead.
I have to abstain, Patrick.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
Anyone?
Me as well.
Okay. There's some extensions there. Okay, so when everyone says aye and there are no nays, that means it's not unanimous this time. Does anyone disagree, say nay? I assume they would have brought up an item, actually. That would be a funny thing to ever get a nay on that. No one brought up an issue before. But anyway, okay, so everyone said aye except for the two that abstained. Financial reports. On to the financial reports. Patrick, would you review the year-to-date financial report as well as the agency account summaries?
Yes, sir. I'm going to share my screen here just so we have the agenda items there for anyone that might be watching on YouTube or doesn't have them in front of them. For the FY 2021 year-to-date financial report, you see there through January 31st, it's about 7 months or just under 60% of the fiscal year, where revenues are at 65% and expenses are 53%. So we're made in good shape, certainly compared to budgeted amounts. All of the normal expenses in terms of operating expenses are online, and that's the main drivers are, again, health and dental insurance and payroll expenses. Those remain very much in line with the adjusted amount that was amended in October. Only notes I would make on revenues is, sometimes at this point in the year in February of the fiscal year, we're sometimes a little bit further ahead, but we do have a couple of jurisdictions that are remitting or paying revenues into us instead of one lump sum at the beginning of the fiscal year on a quarterly basis. So we have some revenues that normally are already accrued that will continue to come in through the rest of the year. And the only other item I'll mention in April, we'll likely bring back a final budget just with a few additional amendments just to make sure that we have it adopted as what it would look like based on additional revenues and expenses that have come in during the year. But all in all, we're very much in good shape on the current fiscal year.
Sounds good.
And the agency financial account summaries, this is just a reminder that every 6 months, so February and August, just provide for Commission's review, just the summary of our 4 main financial accounts, the checking and money market, which are our operating accounts, and then the Virginia investment pool funds, which serve as our, generally as our reserve funds. The one thing I would call your attention to is really just the fluctuations during the course of the year. I mean, we keep the operating accounts, they sort of get lower as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year in May and June. And then once we get back into the beginning of fiscal year with some of the local dues payments as well as some of the statewide revenues, excuse me, through the statewide planning grant that come in at the first of the year, we have healthy balance there in the operating account. On the reserve account, so you can see it's been fairly consistent, slow growth this year. We've certainly seen a lower return on both the Virginia investment pool accounts, just as interest rates have remained low and as we've seen less return in terms of the long-term bond fund. But again, a good amount, which right now exceeds, our reserve total exceeds our mortgage, what we have left on the mortgage, as well as, gives us some cushion in the event of a need for pulling some into the operating side. So scroll through here and you can just sort of see the month to month, again, the fluctuations on the money market account and the operating and the checking account just on the operating side, and the fairly flat return on the reserve side. And then again, just the 10-year kind of account balance, just to give you a sense of where we're going and where we've come from in terms of the accounts. And so we're in very good shape right now, as well as we've been over the past 10 years in terms of our overall account balance. And that certainly provides the Commission with some flexibility at times if there are things and items that you choose to put your funds towards. So certainly much more positive look than in sort of 2013, 2014, where we stand now. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this too.
Oh, Patrick, I'll just say thank you for obviously with being able to do what we've been accomplishing and still grow the funds. It's hats off to you and staff. And so I appreciate your being a good trustee with the funds. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about the reports?
Actually, I don't have a question about the report, but I do have a question regarding financials. Have we had any, or has there been any further discussion about staff wages than there were back in November?
I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Crozier. We did at the executive committee meeting in January. I did sort of outline a process for going through the kind of salary and compensation survey. We have a couple of sources for that. One is the Virginia Association of Planning District Commissions does a biannual, every 2 years, they do a salary survey. So of all the other regional commissions, state, the other 20 of them, and that provides, as I told the executive committee in January, it provides a kind of a snapshot of where other PDCs are in terms of, especially for common positions such as regional planners, things of that nature. I've looked at those in the past, and it at least gives a sense of, if we're kind of meeting a statewide trend. The executive committee did sort of direct me also just to make sure that if we're using those other planning district commissions across the state as part of that compensation comparison and survey, just to choose regional commissions that are in line in terms of population and type of work that they're doing. So I plan to complete that work before budget in June and have whether a recommendation or at least something for the commission to consider at that point.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to make sure it was still on the radar. Thank you, Patrick.
Yes, and Jim, I'll thank you for raising that in the first place. I appreciate your follow-up, and I appreciate your initial nudge on that. It needed to be done. Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess now the Executive Director's report, Patrick.
All right. A couple of items I want to highlight for you. I don't want to list all of these. Sometimes, especially for this February meeting, when we've gone from the second week of December for almost 3 months, sometimes I have a tendency to make this report go a little longer in February, but I don't want to do that today. So I'll highlight a couple of things. One is we have an intern working with us for this kind of spring semester. Lauren Taft has joined as a social work intern working with Foothills Housing Network. And I think, as we've discussed in the past, our work with Foothills Housing Network has often benefited from being able to bring in either interns or AmeriCorps Vista members and a couple times over the past couple of years, just to sort of supplement the work that our staff is doing here and really give some technical assistance there. So we're enjoying having Lauren in the office and then, kind of supporting the work we're doing with Foothills Housing Network. For those of you that weren't aware, in January, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the initial smart scale scores for round 4 were released. Initially, there were 5 projects in the region that were included for funding. There were 6 projects in the region that were included for funding, 4 of which were in Fauquier County, and 2 of them which went in under the commission's application, the I-66 projects, both the westbound and the eastbound I-66 projects in northern Fauquier County, and then the roundabout in Gordonsville at Route 231 and High Street. There was a 6th project in Fauquier County as well that also went in under the commission's application, and that was for Lees Mill Road and Route 1529, just north of Opal. There was a restricted crossing U-turn recommended there, and it was in the initial recommendation from the Office of Intermodal Planning staff to the CTB back in January, but they found in between January and February that there was an error in the way they calculated one of the environmental scores, and so 9 projects across the state were actually, because of that error correction, were removed from funding, and unfortunately one of them was that project in Fauquier County. So I've had initial conversation with planning staff in Fauquier, and I think that's a project that they think would potentially be able to be tweaked and go back in certainly in the future, and obviously based off this year had a good score. So hopefully we'll be able to go back in next year. So we'll keep an eye on Smart Scale. We also will keep an eye on any changes that we might recommend or lobby for to the CTB after this round coming up in the next couple months. That also times pretty well with our regional long-range transportation plan update. And so we have Matthew Decatur, our planner here, working on transportation, has been updating a lot of that information. Our goal there is to really have that plan updated during the calendar year 2021. And so for your benefit and certainly benefit of some of your local staff, we'll be sending around just the recommendations or the projects that are included in the plan right now and ask for local review on that. We've refined this rural long range plan from what it first was in 2011, where it was very much a long list of projects that probably would never get funded, to something that's a little more in line with the revised funding streams through the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So that'll probably come out in March, at least to your local staff, but I'm happy to talk with any of you or anyone else that might have questions on that once that information's out. You see there, the regional housing study. I'll hit on that more in the next agenda item. I did want to highlight that Foothills Housing Network did conduct their annual point in time count on January 27th. And the upshot there is that we tend to expect to see the numbers increase in terms of the number of sheltered individuals that are sheltered either in emergency shelter or transitional housing. As I've mentioned in the past, we have quite a number of individuals and households that are being sheltered in hotels in Culpeper and Fauquier County that have been paid for by either state and federal funds or other kind of local organizations that are providing that shelter right now in non-congregate facilities. So the unsheltered count, it will probably be lower than it normally is. It's normally fewer than 10 individuals, but it'll probably be lower than that this year as well. On the environmental side, I want to highlight too that right now in Culpeper County, the Mountain Run TMDL project is underway, and that's a total maximum daily load implementation plan. And so the Department of Environmental Quality is leading that work that's going on right now. But we're doing some mapping for them that's based on our watershed and Chesapeake Bay contract that we have with them annually. So we've done some residential mapping of septic locations and things like that. So where the benefit of this is in the long term, a lot of this identifying these problems right now and some of the implementation strategies through this TMDL process will allow for funding to be made available, typically in that part of the region through Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District for septic pump out, septic replacement, some cost share funding for that. So other strategies will be developed as well. I know there's been a lot of talk just about, since this is a watershed in Culpeper that also includes the town of Culpeper, is one that's a little different from some of our more rural watersheds, which typically have a lot of agricultural best management practices included as part of the strategies, but this one will also include some urban, some stormwater BMPs as well. So hopefully in the future, we'll have some funding that can flow to some of those projects that will reduce some of the pollutants that end up into those watersheds. Couple under, if you recall in December, the commission heard from Miles Friedman and Jennifer Goldman on youth entrepreneurship, and there's would ask staff to continue to work with both of them on developing a proposal for a Go Virginia project. We're continuing to do that. The next deadline for Go Virginia Region 9 is in early April. We've had a lot of good meetings with local organizations focused on youth, and that includes Culpeper Youth, Boys and Girls Clubs, some of the local economic development staff as well. I think at this point, we're still trying to figure out really for Go Virginia purposes. I think we feel comfortable that the project itself makes a lot of sense and would have a lot of benefit for the region and working with the school systems as well. But I think we're at the point now with Go Virginia where it's really trying to identify a return on investment that can meet the criteria that Go Virginia has. So I think even if it doesn't go forward through Go Virginia, that we'll continue to explore potential other sources if it's one that just doesn't make the case through the metrics that Go Virginia requires. You see there the SEDS application that again was approved in October. It was in partnership with our Planning District Commission to the South, Thomas Jefferson PDC. Feedback from USEDA staff was that they liked the project, but it didn't really qualify for what they were really going for with the CARES Act money. So again, we'll sort of reconvene with some of our local economic developers to see if there is desire to go forward. But the standard grant program, I think, as I mentioned in October, is a 50-50, a 1-to-1 match. And I think we've always struggled to come up with the desire to really push for that at this point. So we'll continue to look for that. But that was the real benefit of applying to the CARES Act allocation was an 80-to-20 match. So again, we'll work with local economic development staff to decide if there's a path forward and if we want to go for that in the future. And then the last thing is just the local technical assistance. I won't read through these, but what I would, ask you to do is just kind of look through these bullet points. It's not everything we're doing, but it kind of gives some high level items of some of the things we've done in the past couple months with some of our localities. And if you don't see your locality listed there, then give me a call and we're happy to talk through if there's stuff that we can help with, or if there's a way that the commission can be of assistance. So happy to take any questions or clarify anything that I've just gone through as part of that report.
Okay, Patrick, hearing none, I thank you very much. You probably don't get as many questions as some of your forebears because you lay it out in such detail that you tend not to have a question after you review it. So thanks for that excellent report. Next, if you recall in October, the commission received a presentation on the draft regional housing study. In a follow-up to that meeting, staff worked with the consultant team to make revisions to the study documents. Patrick, will you review the housing study and revisions for the commission?
I will, and I've got 14 slides, but I'll move them real quickly today. For those of you that were there in October or were watching the stream through the consultant that presented, some of these have similar information, but really my goal here today before asking the commission to consider approval of the study or adoption of the study is to go through sort of the background of what we were looking to do and how we've accomplished that, and also some of the next steps for the regional housing study. So if you remember the background, typically for our role has primarily been on homelessness coordination and technical assistance in terms of local planning efforts. So this 2 years ago, the commission and some of the other local partners identified that need for, just having some data to talk through and provide that background to support some of the local policy decisions related to housing. We got funding through Virginia Housing, the Community Impact Grant Program, and just over a year ago, contracted with Camoin Associates 310 to complete the study. That contract ended December 31st, so we're completed our work with Camoin, and so I appreciate the opportunity. I've gone out to a couple of councils and committees recently, and appreciate the opportunity to present that information. So the purpose of the study, again, we recognize the sort of overarching recognition is that there's the capacity within local governments and frankly, nonprofits in the region regarding housing is the capacity varies quite widely. The patterns of development in the region vary quite widely. And so we were trying to identify and address three purposes. One was to provide that qualitative and quantitative data to help make future housing opportunities and challenges, make decisions related to those opportunities and challenges. Wanted to examine land use practices that either help or perhaps hinder housing developments, not with a judgment of those practices, but just sort of a kind of an audit of what people have right now compared to best practices related to housing. And then some strategy recommendations at the regional and local level. What I would say about the recommendations is very much, we didn't identify recommendations specifically for every jurisdiction, but we sort of have recommendations that fit the region, and then certain areas that probably would maybe make more sense for some of them. But it's not prescriptive in terms of we're asking anybody to take action one way or the other in terms of your local governments. So the scope of work, you sort of see the need as, on the left side, and really the way we proposed and the way we did address the need through this study over the past year. So we have a baseline data analysis. There were stakeholder interviews, which were conducted, entirely over phone or virtual. Originally, we're going to do some field work with the consultant, but because of COVID-19, especially last spring and summer, did those interviews over the phone and virtually. Housing demand analysis, which I think is where a bulk of the kind of interesting and sort of new information is included. The zoning ordinance review, and that was for the 5 counties and the 3 largest towns that indicated interest in having their ordinances reviewed. Again, just a desktop audit that the consultant did. The strategy recommendations, and then locality profiles. And so these are 10 to 12 page sort of profiles that kind of hit the high points of the data that we found. And we have those again for the counties and the 3 largest towns, but we're working, staff is now working with Gordonsville and some of the other, Remington, some of the other smaller towns to develop similar kind of profiles there. The main issue for some of the smaller towns is just that some of the data, especially from census, from American Community Survey, has some quite large margins of error, which make it tough to take a lot of information from that. So we're looking at ways to sort of creatively show some of the information for those towns as well. So key points from the study that I kind of want to share with you. One is the term attainable housing is used in the study quite a bit. And really what we chose, attainable housing versus affordable housing, which I'll talk about next, is really to convey the importance and also the fact that this study was not specifically focused on one type of housing. Attainable housing is meant to convey the importance of diverse housing options across income levels. So that includes market-based and single family homes that may be meeting some need moving forward, as well as some of the more traditional affordable housing ideas and types and styles. When affordable is used in the study, it's primarily used in reference to existing programs, that are designed to increase units available for certain income levels. So lower income levels based on HUD guidelines and HUD income levels set at the federal level by county. There's also a recognition, again, that each county and town maintains that authority for land use decisions, and that whether it's policy changes or decisions on housing development, that it's going to be implemented at different scales and different timelines across the region. And the last thing I would say is that the study includes projected housing needs, and that includes some numbers. But what I would, again, kind of urge everyone is to consider is that the themes and trends are what's most important, rather than getting caught up in specific numbers. I think that it's helpful sometimes to think through in terms of just numbers and percentages, but really, I think at this point in time, this being the first regional housing study that we've done, I think it's important to also remember that the trends are as important as thinking about specific numbers. So just real quick, and some of this is similar to what we heard in October from Amy Collins with Camoin, but the baseline analysis, again, not terribly surprising. The region has an aging population. There's uneven population growth, with really over the past 20 years growth in 3 of our counties, Fauquier, Culpeper, and Orange, and little to no growth in Madison and Rappahannock. And even within those counties, there are some quite striking differences of where the growth is occurring. Continuing to see a lot of outcommuting and that rate increasing for people looking and going out of the region for work. a low rental vacancy rate, which oftentimes just can kind of show or tell that there's a lack of rentals in general if there's a low turnover rate. And single family units, in terms of what's been approved and what's been built, they continue to be the main housing stock that's being built in the past 10 years and permitted as well. So the demand analysis, there's a significant increase in housing demand. I think as we've seen, new construction has largely been single family homes. Some of the market response, especially for, I would say 55 plus or senior type developments has come about, but it has not met some of the need that we've seen and certainly not what is projected. So by 2040, population growth could, could increase housing stock by 20% if the projections were right. There would need to be 20% more housing to accommodate just based on population growth. That largest demand, again, at the 65 plus age. And the cost burdened, 1/3 of homeowners and 40% of renters being cost burdened, that comes from, those households spending more than 30% of their income on housing and housing related things such as utilities. So when we talk about the demand, and this is where I share the numbers, but also, again, just ask you to look at the trends as well. In the blue on the left side here, the demand for new units, the blue is showing based on that population growth over the next 5 years. So you can see that's fairly well, spread out over various income levels. You've got, a demand at over 200% of area median income in the region, but then a demand for population growth for incomes under 50% all the way up to 120 to 200%. The orange over here that's the underhoused population. And so if you recall, the underhoused population refers to those individuals 18 to 34 that are living with someone else that's not a spouse or a partner. So it may be someone 18 to 34 living with their parents or have with a roommate or multiple roommates that ideally would like to have their own space, whether it be an apartment or a townhouse or something along those lines. That number is, again, not that entire population. It's just a subset of 7.5% of that population that I just talked about. And then on the cost burden side, this kind of shows you those households that are spending more than 30% on housing and housing costs. And you can see where that largely impacts lower income levels. So under 50% AMI, 50 to 80% AMI. And the other thing that we've started to think about is, a lot of the programs that are available for, either for homelessness or for some of the HUD programs that are available for subsidies that are already, have waiting lists are also typically targeted to, below 30% AMI in some cases. So you have a large segment in here that just is not being met by some of the programs based on existing programs. So the strategies and recommendations, and I'll move through these again pretty quickly because I know Amy talked about them in October and I have shared these with you. First one is to increase and preserve the supply of attainable housing. And so that, again, continuing to engage and support market-driven responses because there is a need for some of those based on population growth and just existing residents in the region. Universal design principles, and so that's something that if you've got a house that's designed for someone, maybe a single level house that might be, designed for someone in that aging demographic, but that also allows to transfer, to younger generations that may be able to use that house as well. Targeted incentives for higher density and mixed use, and that's possibly in designated UDAs, which we have several in the region. And then some other strategies here related to inventorying existing multifamily and affordable rentals, just to make sure if those sell that they don't stop being affordable if there's a change in ownership. The last one is inventorying underutilized buildings, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So the second, addressing perceptions of growth in attainable housing. And so this is one where we just see a lack of available housing in the region that's caused stagnation and sometimes prevents natural turnover in the market. So just not having enough stock, and specifically in the rental market. We've seen rentals, again, consistently challenging at rates across the board, and some of that impact at lower income levels. The last bullet point there is education and advocacy. And I sort of bring that up just because I think my sense and my feeling is that the commission is very much, able to help with educating and taking some of this information from the study I think advocacy falls to a different group, and potentially some nonprofit groups in the region have indicated their interest in taking that on. But I know one of the strategies and recommendations in the study talked about advocacy and education. And I think it's important just to consider, not making a decision today, but just considering what the roles and the proper roles might be moving forward. Addressing maintenance needs and alleviating some standard housing stock. Again, across the region, rental and owned homes were noted as having issues regarding maintenance, and in some cases, primarily in some of the rural rather than the urban areas in the region. The main thing here is, again, collaboration between those existing nonprofit groups and volunteer-driven home repair groups. So I think what we've seen here is just kind of fostering some greater discussion, and potentially, if there are nonprofit groups that are doing some of this home repair, empowering them either through funding support or through just again supporting and allowing them to collaborate with others to increase their ability to meet some of the needs that have been identified. And then the final kind of overarching strategy is examine and adapt existing land use protocols. And so really what we know here is that, we've got the region's rural character and just the historical context. So there's significant areas in the region that are not going to have development. That's also due to infrastructure limitations in terms of existing infrastructure, the cost to expand infrastructure, but also the cost to maintain infrastructure. And again, this being sort of the first regional housing study that we've done, at least in the past, 15 years, it's sort of an emerging subject. And I think we've sort of approached this as this is a jumping off point for many of the local governments in the region, but also the commission as well, in terms of, how we kind of implement some of these recommendations moving forward. So just to give you a quick update, since October when Camoin presented, the three things that were sort of identified in their report about what do you do now. The first one was get the data and the word out about this report. And so again, I've given several presentations, Town of Culpeper Planning Commission and the town's Planning and Public Works and Public Safety Committee, Warrenton Town Council earlier this month, the PATH Foundation, their Senior Services Committee, as well as the Fauquier Prince William League of Women Voters asked for a presentation on this as well. So appreciate all of, certainly Ms. Schaefer, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Hively on allowing me to present to your commissions and boards, and certainly reiterate that the option is out there. I'm happy to come speak to other local commissions or boards about the high level findings and some of the local impacts as well. The focus on short-term tasks, some of the things that our staff has done since October, we've pulled some of the data from the Camoin report that I just kind of reviewed and combined that data with Foothills Housing Network data, again, just to sort of provide an additional kind of real world kind of tie-in to some of the stuff that we have through Foothills Housing Network. That does, certainly get at the lower or the lowest income levels, but it certainly provides some ability to make the case that there are some things identified in the study that do have real world examples that we can provide. We've had Jennifer Little, who's on our staff part-time, has conducted windshield surveys looking at that underutilized and or vacant buildings and lots. And it's been helpful. Jennifer is someone that has worked here as a Vista for a year, but doesn't really have a tie to the region. And so I sort of tasked her with go out with fresh eyes and someone that can just kind of go in and not worry about, if you see a building, who owns it or whatever. It's just really to get a sense of what might be possible in the region. So she's been to Warrenton through the town of Culpeper, through the town of Orange, and then Remington and Gordonsville in the next week or so. And that's really just something to kind of get people thinking creatively and looking at, potentially there are some buildings and lots that may be utilized for innovative and creative housing ideas. And Jennifer has also created a housing diversity overview document. And really what that is focused on is, again, towards that education piece of here's some of the innovative ideas that might be applicable or might be implementable locally here in the region. And then the last thing is just that collaboration and education piece. So we've continued to engage our study work group, and I think that's something that we'll do over the course of at least the next year, is to continue to work with them in terms of local government staff, but also some of the nonprofit partners to identify opportunities that we can do to support them and just support the work that they're doing as well. And so the next steps here, again, today, what I'm asking for would be either your consideration of adoption or approval of the study and the recommendations again. We're going to continue to engage your local governments. I've got Fauquier Planning Commission in March. And again, the offer is out there for anyone that would like to hear this information. Just reach out to me. One thing that came up at I think it was at the Warrenton Town Council meeting earlier this month was, will the data be updated? And that's always a question, a concern. You go through a study process where you've paid a consultant to collect a lot of data. I think, I would like to say that we'll be able to do updates, whether we can do them annually. I'm not sure, but I'm also looking at trying to pull some funding resources that would provide that option for us to continue to track some of this data moving forward. And not necessarily for today, but just for the commission's consideration, I think it would be helpful moving forward based off this study and just the work that everyone's doing locally to give some consideration to what the commission's role in housing moving forward is. As I said, we're continuing to be the lead agency for Foothills Housing Network, but I think we should probably, it would take some time over the next year to sort of clarify what our role could be or what it should be. There's certainly some statewide opportunities that might inform that as well. House Bill 854, which required a statewide affordable housing study. There's a similar JLARC study that the General Assembly asked that I sat in on a focus group last week to give them some feedback on the role that PDCs play right now. And also Virginia Housing potentially, having some additional funding to support some of the things that we want to do. So again, not asking for any, direction there at this point, but just put it on your radar that it might be something to consider moving forward over the next year. And that is my presentation on that one. But I'm, again, happy to answer questions on the housing study and sort of how we got to where we are today.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Absolutely, Gary.
Patrick, that's a very good presentation that you gave. And we in Culpeper realized several years ago that we had a problem because a lot of the major investors came into the community and purchased all the rental houses that were available, multifamily and single family. And all the affordable housing basically that was in place disappeared because most of the time, with the market the way it is, they raised their rates by at least 25%. So we have a problem in Culpeper, and I'm thinking, as you stated in your presentation, that other jurisdictions have the same problem. Now, so we went forward to establish a group, which we still have in place in Culpeper, made up of government, myself, Supervisor Bates, as well on the County Board of Supervisors, Chris Hively, his planner, several developers, several realtors, Foothills, and of course, Lisa Peacock with Human Services and some of her staff. It's a good group. Unfortunately, COVID has impacted that group and the collaboration efforts. But what I'm hearing is, and what I'm thinking is going on with this effort, unfortunately, is it keeps getting deferred down the road to where I think a lot of our people that are involved with this, and I am too, to a certain degree, is tentative to get something in place because we're frightened that it's going to impact the economic development part of our community. And although I know that that can be a worry to all of us, I think it's still good to go ahead and kind of facilitate this effort and without deferring, a year or two, like I heard you say, work on this for the next year. Well, to me, it's only going to get worse. And I know that being in real estate for a long, long time, that a developer has a tough time getting tax credits for affordable housing because the jurisdictions, only want them in certain areas. I know Culpeper, the town of Culpeper, for example, will only give a support letter for an application for tax credits, for a couple spots within our town that are very blighted. And basically the perimeter in the county, there are no options. And I don't want to impact our community from an economic development standpoint. So I'm all about strategy to get the perfect locations for affordable housing and to work on the ordinances within our community as far as development, as far as tap fees, et cetera. But I think it's a problem that we really need to look at and basically accelerate the collaboration effort instead of deferring for a year or two down the road. Because right now we have a lot of homeless people. We have a lot of people that are looking for housing, from the $400 range to the $800 range per month, and they're just not out there. So I'm a big proponent of this, to be smart with it, but to go forward and try to maneuver to the best of our ability to get something in place. And as far as the group that we're meeting with, we haven't met since the COVID came in play back in March of last year. But if we would love to have you come, Patrick, and give a presentation to that group. And I'm not sure if we want to make it a regional group or not, but I'm sure the group that's in place in Culpeper would be willing to do so.
I appreciate.
That's all I have.
I'm certainly happy to speak with him. And I know our COC coordinator, Rebecca Wareham, has sat in on a couple of those meetings about a year ago. And I think I also agree with you that it's not so much deferring, but I agree there's opportunities now to make to address some of the needs. And I think that is locally specific, but wanting to make sure that we bring in regional opportunities when possible. But yeah, if you wanted me to connect with Lisa or someone else, I'm happy to do that to kind of get this in front of that group as well.
I speak with no specific knowledge, but just assuming that localities like Prince William and Fairfax, on the timeline of this issue arising and becoming more of a challenge, I assume that maybe Fauquier, maybe not. I'm really thinking more Fairfax or Prince William may have been where we are a number of years ago. And I didn't know if we had contacted those localities for specific strategies they'd utilized and best practices that they'd utilized to address it rather than just throwing money at it. They might have actually discovered the most economical, most effective ways of chipping away at it. Any problem that I think may have been addressed earlier, I always like to see how people addressed it before we figure out how we're going to do it. So I didn't know if anyone had contacted those localities or anyone you think might be more appropriate.
If I might, Mr. Chair, the one thing I would say is that in the study itself are a lot of, with recommendations are examples of case studies and primarily from Virginia, just because, we want to make sure that, anything that might be recommended is eligible and legal in Virginia for local implementation. Right. So that is included. That's one of the things that as part of that education piece that I think our staff can continue to collect and look at some of those things. I would also say that, again, the where things have been implemented previously, I think we're also, I'm at least very, aware of needing to not, with Fairfax or Prince William being, the most logical one to say, well, here's what we could do. But I think we've got a lot of those things that are included in the study, and that includes things from urban areas, but as well as some of the rural areas in Virginia that, have been very active. If you recall when this all kicked off 2 years ago, the Virginia Housing VHDA presentation at the time talked about a workforce housing development, and I think it was Middlesex actually, that had been developed and that they had partnered on. So I think there's good opportunities, and a lot of the information is gathered now, but we'll continue to put that information together and share it back.
Excellent, Patrick. Any other comments or questions? Then I'll entertain a motion to adopt this regional housing study if someone would like to make that motion.
I would so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Let's have a roll call vote, please, Patrick.
Okay. Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Mayor Coyner?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Deal?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue,
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson,
Aye.
Mr. Hively, Mr. Hobbs,
Aye.
Ms. Hoffman,
Aye.
Mr. McCullough,
Sorry, aye.
Mayor Roby,
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer,
Aye.
Ms. Taylor,
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees,
Aye.
and Mr. Woods.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Patrick. Next, we'll go ahead and move on to new business. Patrick, would you review item 11A for us?
Yes, this is the annual request to the Department of Rail and Public Transportation for our RRRC commuter services program. And if you see in the cover memo, traditionally this has been what's been called the Transportation Demand Management or TDM program. DRPT this year has rebranded that to the Commuter Assistance Program. I think also, TDM was sort of confusing, but I think with commuter assistance, it does reflect the primary program goal of reducing single occupancy vehicles. So for the commission, what this does is provide funding for 1.5 full-time equivalent staff that provide outreach and advertising and customer service to commuters or anybody that's looking for ways of reducing single occupancy vehicle trips. So that includes transit and other programs such as that. So the request this year for the including all of the program expenses is to DRPT is $133,264, which is a little bit lower than last year. And there's a 20% match, which is made up out of the local dues of $33,316. Happy to answer questions. It's just a resolution supporting that request.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Again, you explained things so thoroughly. A lot of times no questions are prompted. With that in mind, I would entertain a motion to approve the certification of local match funding for fiscal year 2022 Commuter Assistance Program Operating Grant.
So moved.
Moved.
I believe we've got a motion and a second there. I should make the motion for second separate, and I will. To take the motion there that you had first, and is there a second, please?
Second.
There we go. Worked out the same anyway, I believe. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Mayor?
You caught me sipping water.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Deal?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Eggertson?
Aye.
Yeah, Mr. Hobbs?
Aye.
Ms. Hoffman?
Aye.
Mr. McCullough?
Aye.
Mayor Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer?
Aye.
Ms. Taylor?
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees?
Aye.
Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Wonderful. Thanks, Patrick. Next, we have 2 administrative policies related to financial management procedures and whistleblower protection that are to follow a grant compliance review for the Homeless Solutions Program. Patrick, do you have any comments?
Now that I'm unmuted, yeah, I just real quick, if part of my director's report I didn't mention, but we've had a couple of compliance reviews in the last couple of months. One is a Title VI review through VDOT, and then we had our DHCD conducted a compliance review for our Homeless Solutions Program grant. And no major findings, 2 that we need to address, but both of these, the first is related to financial management, and really the request was that some of the procedures that we have in place needed to be formally included in writing and board considered. So these are things that have been in place and, frankly, I think probably were part of multiple different procedures or policies, but we've put them all together into one as part of the financial management policy. And then the second was whistleblower protection policy, and that really comes into play because there was a General Assembly amendment, I think, or excuse me, a bill last year that was approved that required some additional whistleblower protection. So we did not have a whistleblower protection policy in place, but we will if this policy passes. Again, this was the letter that came from DHCD, which you have to review there if you want, but the only other corrective action, which is not an immediate response, was just related to, that was the corrective actions for those two policies. The only other concern that was noted was one about, Foothills Housing Network in general and having procedures in place related to diversion, but that's something that we have already been working on and are addressing that. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, this really just outlines some things that are already in place and in place with our financial management processes.
Anyone have any questions for Patrick? Then hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission Financial Management Process Policy and the Whistleblower Protection Policy.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? And let's have a roll call vote on that, Patrick.
Okay, Mr. Butler?
Aye.
Mayor Coiner?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Deal?
Aye.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Eckertson?
Aye.
Mr. Hobbs?
Aye.
Ms. Hoffman?
Aye.
Mr. McCullough?
Aye.
Mayor Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Schaefer?
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Aye.
Mr. Voorhees?
Aye.
Mr. Woods?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Patrick. Next on the agenda, item 11C, that's the Department of Housing and Community Development annual request for the Commission to set regional priorities for community development block grant funding. Patrick, can you review this request and recommendation?
Yes, this is annual request from DHCD, and scroll down to pull that up just so anybody can see it. The main thing here is this is an annual request, and if you have a community development block grant application that goes into DHCD, they have priorities that are set by each region. So each regional commission sets these priorities, and you can put 2, 3 in priority 1, you get 50 points per application, and 2 in priority 2. What's on the cover memo there are the existing priorities, which I don't recommend any changes to. What would be helpful, though, is if you know of any potential CDBG program applications or planning grant applications going in, we can list those as well. I know this not been a funding source that's been used heavily in the region in the past, but I know this year town of Culpeper received one for business assistance related to COVID-19. And there's a couple of planning grant applications that we're aware of going in, potentially from one in Orange with Orange Downtown Alliance, potentially looking at some comprehensive community development planning grant application, and then one potentially around the town of Washington that was under discussion related to some of their water and sewer infrastructure, I think. So if you know of any others, I'm happy to hear those now, but I wouldn't recommend any changes to the priorities as identified last year.
Okay. Questions, comments to Patrick? Then the requested action here is to approve the staff to submit the tiered priority list for the 2021 Community Development Block Grant Regional Priorities, along with the expected projects from the region to DHCD. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote's not needed on this. So if everybody's unmuted, more of a simultaneous response when I say all in favor please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Thank you very much. It's approved. And finally, as you may know, the Regional Assembly granted counties the ability to implement a cigarette tax during the 2020 session. Cities and towns previously and continue to have this ability. Given the option, the General Assembly's recent encouragement to consider regional implementation, the Commission may want to consider direction or discussion on local or regional options related to the cigarette tax. Paul, Ted, I'd like for maybe a county administrator to maybe start off on this topic. Maybe before we even throw it to Patrick, if anybody has any strong or any opinions at all. And then, of course, Patrick, I'll want you to chime in as well.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to kick it off. This is Ted Voorhees from Orange County. So, a couple of things. For many years, counties have been asking the General Assembly for equal taxing authority. And, there's a menu of taxes that city governments had that counties either didn't have or had to ask the General Assembly for permission to enact or perhaps hold a referendum on. Last General Assembly, they did grant this sort of broad equal taxing authority concept. One of those authorities is a cigarette tax. Many towns and municipal governments already collect this tax, and it's often a requirement that a tax stamp be sold that either a retailer might apply or a wholesaler would apply to each pack of cigarettes. So one of the things that kind of came out of the cigarette taxing authority is this idea that rather than have every county have their own tax stamp and their own way of doing business, the cigarette industry had been lobbying that they would prefer that counties join together into regional taxing entities so that they could sort of, get used to kind of one way of doing business in each region and not have a multitude of stamps and a multitude of forms and what have you. So there was some push to force that. That was pushed back a little bit, but there still remains, a strong legislative interest in seeing that we do it regionally, and certainly the industry would prefer it that way. So some conversations have been underway across the state about what should that look like, and we've had some local conversations amongst some of the administrators and managers about whether that's an appropriate role for our PDC. The TJ PDC has had a similar conversation, and then some other groups, just local government to local government, have had some conversations. So where I stand from Orange is I've communicated to my board that I've just sort of put feelers out to any possible entity so that I would at least be understanding what Orange County's options are. And so as I understand it, this conversation might yield some interest in having our PDC, look at being that regional entity that would administer a regional cigarette tax. The TJ PDC has said that they would be open to others joining. Potentially that might include Orange. The Northern Virginia Cigarette Tax Board staff have indicated that they're open to new members. I don't think any formal action has been taken on that. So we're sort of at the crossroads of, which direction might we go in. I don't have a particular preference. I think as a board, we just have to ask ourselves whether we think our PDC is an appropriate place to house something like this. And there's some potential economies of scale to be realized. There are also some potential general, sort of support for the entity that can come from, gathering a bit of administrative fees to help support the other good work that the planning district does. But we have to make that decision. Do we think that's where we want to put our focus? And so my final sort of thought to that is just technical, and that is that, as I understand it, what would be required is anybody who would like to join in would essentially have to pass an ordinance, set a rate, and appoint a member to what would be known as a regional cigarette tax board. And then that board would be the group that would hire staff to do administration or contract with some entity to do the administration, which would be the accounting and the sale of stamps and the enforcement, which is usually sort of in the nature of auditing. And they could, in fact, contract with a PDC, for example, to do that work, or they could contract with a PDC who could then choose to do hiring, or again, they could hire their own people directly. So those are just some thoughts, and I'll stop there and leave it for others to ask questions or comment.
I think Ted's explanation is very thorough, but I guess to simplify it in terms of what Madison's looking for, my board has asked that the cigarette tax be developed, and we can do that. But certainly for Little Madison County, the amount of money that's going to come off of this is going to be eclipsed if we have to start hiring people to do collection, enforcement, and stand up this whole administrative infrastructure. So if we do go down this path, it's very clear that we need to join some regional organization to do the, figuring this out, selling stamps and all the other things that are particular to this this type of tax. I do think that we do have options. Apparently there's this Charlottesville group. There's the Northern Virginia thing that's already stood up. But what we asked Patrick to do at this last cycle was if it makes some sense if we could do this more locally, and if Patrick could stand this up and there's money to be made on this, that could be a vehicle for funding a group like the Planning District Commission, which is chronically underfunded. Maybe that would be a bigger win than just the whatever tax we're going to get on the local level, in a sense. So that's where I was coming from on this.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say on behalf of Culpeper, I really can't add a whole lot to what Jack and Ted had to say. My board of supervisors hasn't made any decision or commitment that they want to pursue the tax, but if they do, obviously, the regional approach would be ideal, and whether or not we put those feelers out to existing groups or whether this commission and Patrick think it's a moneymaker that would benefit our region, then, that certainly is a viable option from my standpoint too.
From Fauquier County standpoint, we will be talking to the board as part of our budget process about whether they're interested in imposing this tax. They haven't leaned one way or the other at the moment. If they do, obviously, we also feel a regional approach is appropriate. There's a little bit of complication or considerations involved in this area in that Warrenton is already has a tax and is in with the Northern Virginia board. Having said that, in previous discussions, I've said that Fauquier is not 100% tied to that. If the PDC decides it wants to look at a regional approach, we'd be more than happy to look at that also and see which one is the best option for the county as we go forward.
Ken, thank y'all for that. And, you know, the county's perspective, not being involved in this before. Is Greg Wood still on here?
Yes, I am.
Greg, I know that Gordonsville's been set up for years on this, and there's no problem at all administering it. When the folks that need the stamps, their inventory is low, they just buy some more from us, and we get the money from selling the stamps, and they put them on. There's not a lot of administration.
Ours takes about 4 hours a year.
Right.
What's
going on? Yeah.
We order stamps once a year, and then when they want some, usually it's about 3 or 4 rolls a month. They just order it and we send it in. It's not a lot of work. The question I would have is whether, and I think Ted answered it very good, was that, but I don't understand exactly how it would work if each of the localities could have a different tax. But my view was if it's going to be regional, I would just assume to be with Patrick and his group.
Well, and my concern from Gordonsville would be the rate. The devil's in the details. That would be like all of us right here, right now, agreeing on the same real estate tax rate.
Yeah.
We all have different funding needs in different situations. And so that would be my concern. Like, for instance, Orange gets so much more in meals tax than we do. And of course, they're just larger in general, but their cigarette tax is 12 cents per pack and theirs is 20. Now, we need the 20 and we're still underfunded. Of course, the regional commission, you talk about them being underfunded. Trust me, town of Gordonsville certainly is. And like Greg said, our concern would be, would it be one rate? And what would that rate be? And, you know, with the net amount we received, net of administrative expenses, net us less money that we can't really afford to take. So I think conceptually it's all fine I'm a big, gosh, for 20 years, I've been all about regionalism. I mean, that's what I've pushed 24 hours a day. But the devil's in the details with anything. And so my concern would be the rate and the net money received after administrative expenses. And something that sounds like it's simpler is actually being more complex because nothing could be simpler the way we've already got it. So nothing proposed can be simpler because it's too simple. That's my input.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ted again, just a couple of thoughts. So, you know, I hear exactly what you're saying on those sort of rate issues and simplicity and what have you. As I understand it, there would be nothing about a regional group that would require any existing cigarette taxing jurisdiction to change anything if they did not want to. So if we were to set up a regional approach, any of the towns could choose to just do things as they're doing it. So that's certainly one thing that would be of interest to me. I wouldn't want any regional entity to be perceived as taking over anything that someone didn't want to be taken over or forcing anybody to do anything they didn't want to do. So that's one piece. The second piece is from the county standpoint, even though it sounds simple, what y'all explain, I'm taking the position that even simpler is for me to do nothing except, you know, pass an ordinance and sign an MOU and let some regional entity just send me a check. So, you know, that's why I favor some sort of regional. We don't do anything now because we don't even collect it. So I would benefit from the simplicity standpoint that you outlined by having somebody else do it, and that could even be a town or somebody else, you know, like the existing tax boards, and we just contract with them. And then the third thing about the rates, I thought that we would probably have to go to the same rate to make this work regionally. I'm told that's not the case in the Northern Virginia Tax Board. Everybody has their own rate, and they really just handle it through accounting. I don't know quite how that works, but they seem to say that's no problem. So that would give every jurisdiction maximum control over their rate, so you wouldn't have to conform to something. But I would make this comment that if we were to adopt a regional rate, then it would make a level playing field for everyone And so you wouldn't have people saying, well, I'm not going to buy cigarettes in town because the counties aren't charging it or whatever. And I think some of that goes on now. People escape Charlottesville and drive, out to one of the county sites and purchase in bulk and what have you. So, I believe that this might be a way to actually set a regional rate where it's a level playing field. And then people don't do that. And I would imagine we could set a regional rate, come to some terms where it would be higher than the 20 cents that you're referring, so that you wouldn't lose anything. But that as you say, Mr. Chairman, is one of the devils in the details. But there is flexibility to do it, where you don't have to have a regional rate. And those are just my observations. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. And I can tell you that as far as towns, I would assume that you would take a lot of their opposition out of this if we could go to that rate or higher, so that wouldn't be a disparity. And then I think you could probably get their support, would be my guess.
So Bob, it's not a problem. Would Gordonsville be willing to take this on for the rest of us counties?
What I try and do to keep the respect of everyone I represent, not speak for them. When I don't speak for people, they really love me. When I start speaking for them, they start questioning me.
All right.
I'll be willing to ask. I'll ask them what they think, but I won't go out on a limb. All respect to the full board. But the question I would have, though, if there were different rates, obviously, like Ted said, it would work best with the same rate. And I'm not worried at all. It's funny. I know you've got to mention it because that was the conversation flow started with, and the push was from the industry. Now, I can't pass up the opportunity. And of course, politically correct, you've got to say, with all due respect. And I guess that makes everything all right for what follows. But with all due respect, for an industry that hadn't minded killing millions of Americans through their entire history after knowledge of what it does to us, I'm not too concerned about what the industry is interested in this matter. If it helps us at all, that's fine. If it helps the region, if it helps local government, I'm your man. I'm all for it. But I could care less what the cigarette industry thinks about anything. If the industry went away, America would be better off. So that have to put my 2 cents in about the industry because I'm not collecting those campaign donations from them, so I can say what I really think. So, okay, back to the regional issue. I don't understand if we do have a regional thing and we have 8 different tax rates, I don't see how, and the reason I talked about the industry was, I don't see how it helps the industry because the regional body taking care of it would still be selling 8 different different types of rolls of stamps for different rates. In Gordonsville, they wouldn't be selling this tax rate stamps. It wouldn't be, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I'm not hearing the way that with the efficiencies and having a one stamp that could encompass the different rates. But maybe maybe it's all just on computers and maybe there's batch numbers and those batch numbers have different rates on them. I don't know. But anyway, the bottom line is if we get our rate, I think it's actually better that we do have one tax rate, whatever it is, because there's no incentive for the person to buy their cigarettes anywhere else. So,
Mr. Chairman, you're surmising there on how they do it is what I actually understand is what they do in Northern Virginia. They're serially numbered stamps. They sell them at the rate of the jurisdiction, and they
right.
That's how they audit for them.
Gotcha. And I could
one
see
regional
that way.
stamp.
Right.
In fact, actually, Northern Virginia does a little bit better than most in that they have a deal with the state. So it's a dual stamp, so that way they don't have a separate stamp for the state tax and the local tax. They have a dual stamp that the wholesalers buy that's for Northern Virginia and the state.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Brandy from the town of Warrenton. I did take some time to look into this a little bit more closely. We have never matched any of our rates regionally. They are administered based on what we adopt each year, and they do vary We get monthly reports on how many packets we sold. It has every jurisdiction that's in the regional group, what they sold. We all have different ratios, different interest earnings, and then it shows the associated fees and the amount of money we will be getting for the month. There are two different types of things. There's both the vendors and the suppliers and those stickers. I did meet with the finance department to see if there were any reservations about moving away from this and looking at some other kind of regional option. They said this is really just an accounting exercise that's run through each month with the cigarette board. But the only time that it has been extremely useful to us is when we experienced a big influx of fake stickers. So the enforcement and the handling of all of that was done by the board. So not our police department, not our local law enforcement. So that was a time that they really stepped up and helped us with something aside from just the accounting exercise. So they just wanted to point that out, that there is sometimes those things that pop up and they bring the full force down on that and handled all of that themselves. So that was the only other thing they wanted me to share, that as we look at this, that there is the associated enforcement arm, but it does vary widely in Northern Virginia. I mean, I'm on the same report as Fairfax County. You know, they got $2.2 million in 1 month, and we get, looks like, 12,000. So, I mean, it's such a huge range, but that enforcement thing was the one thing that they did want us to kind of think about how we would handle that component, not just the financial exercise of the distribution of the stickers and that portion of it as well.
Brandy, is the Northern Virginia group, is that the regional commission, or is that actually a cigarette regional group or something?
Yeah, it's completely separate.
Okay. And the enforcement issues, we haven't had any problem with that. We, our police officers will look for stamps, and when we're in them, we'll check occasionally. But we haven't come across any issues. Do you know if that was through the wholesalers as far as counterfeit, or retailers, or what was the source of any counterfeit?
I don't know the details. I can look into that more, but I believe it was more on the wholesale side, and then they got flooded into our market, and then it was trying to retract them from multiple locations and track down where that happened. So it was a pretty big exercise that they went through here locally, and lasted for quite some time to track it all down, but there wasn't anything on the town or anything for us to do. So that was just something to point out. I mean, that's worst case scenario if something like that happens, but just to consider how we would handle that as a regional group if that happened, with our own stickers, if someone started counterfeiting them and doing things, how we would kind of go about that.
The amount you receive on that report, can you tell me what percentage, do you know what you would get if you were selling those stamps? Let's take the 12,000. If there were no administrative fees or anything else, do you know what that fee would have been? I guess what I'm asking is what percentage, works out to be for the administrative and any other expenses?
Of that $14,967, we owed them $2,117 for the month.
For the month. So y'all are paying $25,000 to $26,000 a year in administrative costs for that.
Mm-hmm. And we did monitor pretty closely when we raised rates in 2018. So we pre-studied that, what we were selling as a ratio next to the other gas stations. And then when we raised the rates, we actually saw no impact in more people driving just right to the county to buy versus in town. We actually had our sales continue to go up. So as we have raised rates on this over the last few years, we've not seen any impact on the sales, because there was some arguments among council that if we raised the rate, people were just going to drive into the county to buy it. We were actually going to lose money in the long run. And so we monitor closely just number of packets sold, which is what we also get in our reports monthly from the cigarette board. And there was actually an uptick. So just sharing that as we're talking about rates and regional rates, we did not see any changes. We actually saw the opposite. So as you think about those rates, we did not see any of that evidence play out that way.
Okay. Well, I would just say that those sort of administrative fees for what Greg says, like 3 or 4 hours a year, I would say ours is probably 2 or 3 hours a year. That would be prohibitive for us to get into that many thousands of dollars in expenses for something that's simple for us to do. So again,
it looks like we sell a lot, Bob. So
yeah.
I would just point out, like, when I'm looking at the report, Warrenton is selling more packets of cigarettes than Leesburg is. So I think that there's also, it doesn't seem to be tied to your population, the amount you're selling. So we have a pretty big through commute. So we have about 38,000 people pass through here during the day going to Northern Virginia or towards Culpeper. So I think we're picking up some of that. So I think our numbers are pretty high. I'm looking at like Clifton, they only owed $13.89. So Warrenton cigarette sales is relatively high based on our population.
Gotcha.
The one thing, if I could add, Bob, on we've not had any issues with, we've checked it from time to time about whether the stamps were on the package at the various vendors. But we've have had a couple of instances where we have what we call the Smurfs. Our law enforcement has had to apprehend, so to speak, when Papa Smurf drives up in a car, he's from somewhere, and the little Smurfs jump out of the car and they run into several of the areas that sell cigarettes at the same time, and they buy the limit. Then they all jump back in the car and they take them to New York. So we've had that issue, but not an issue of counterfeiting.
Well, isn't the blue collar give them away right away?
Yeah.
If they're Smurfs, man, they should jump right out at you.
So I'm happy to look into this a little bit more, give them a call, investigate it a little bit more, understand how it's being done, if that's helpful to the overall commission. But where Warrenton stands, we're not tied one way or the other. We know the fees we're paying and where we are, and we found it to be a good arrangement, but we're not gonna not be open to looking at other things. But I'm happy to call them and get a little bit more information on how it's administered and go from there and bring that back to you all. And I was also told there's nothing stopping me from releasing these reports. So if you want to take a look at them and understand them, look at the ratios, look at that kind of stuff, I'm happy to share that with the commission as well.
I appreciate that, Brandy. Appreciate it very much. Other comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I got to jump off this call onto another call, but I just wanted to leave a last thought, which is, the counties have to do something if we want to charge or collect this tax. And so we sort of don't really have a whole lot of options but to go with, something that functions, right? So if TJ stands up this thing, then that's where I might recommend our board go. If RRPDC stands it up, I might recommend we go that way. If Northern Virginia takes us, I might recommend that. We're not going to do it by ourselves. And so the real question, in my mind is who's going to do it first and kind of agree to roll. We don't really have a lot of choices because I don't know that we want to stand it up.
Okay, Ted, appreciate that. Yeah. And a little bit out of order on my part, but when I have a county administrator, I do like input on important issues if I'm going to lose them in a minute. Can I ask you if you have any issues with our bylaw change to add the immediate past president to the executive committee and or our nominating? Of course, you haven't heard the nominating group, I guess, but any issues with the rest of the agenda before you jump off?
No, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you, sir.
Patrick, do you want to comment on the regional commission's willingness or ability to take this on, or just any other comments you'd have about the cigarette tax?
Sure. Yes, sir. I apologize. I somehow got kicked off. I didn't even know if you were the host of the Zoom meeting and get kicked off, but there I was. So what I would say is everything that the discussion that I just heard, I think makes sense. And from my perspective, the standing up of a regional cigarette board would be fairly straightforward. The Northern Virginia, their ordinance, template ordinance that I think Fairfax County has in place, and then their sort of bylaws or the governing documents for Northern Virginia, I have a copy of. I appreciate Ms. Schaefer's comment about the enforcement piece, because that is really the nuts and bolts of figuring out how to stand it up. The administration of buying some stamps and being able to distribute those, I think is exactly what you've said. And I had a conversation with Town of Culpeper staff on what they do. And it's not a very onerous administrative task, but I think you have to be sure that you've got the capacity in place should that worst case scenario happen. So that would be the only thing. I think it would be definitely something that we could review and bring something back if that was the pleasure of the commission, to give options to those counties that are considering it. I appreciate also Mr. Forhe's pointing out that there's other options available. So I don't think if we don't do it, I don't think it precludes any of the counties. But if that is the commission's desire, then I'm happy to pull that information together and bring it back.
Well, Patrick, I think if the counties are probably going to feel that way, I think it behooves us to try and do something, because there are going to be administrative fees, and it's no sense in sending those to Charlottesville or Northern Virginia. I think it's at least you looking into it to see what it would entail, because it'd be nice to keep the money regionally if we could.
Okay.
Mayor Corner, we're not locked into the Planning District Commission doing it, but the idea was that if this could be a moneymaker for the Planning District Commission, it was an opportunity that doesn't come along very often. And so that was the ask of Patrick, is to do something on the back of an envelope. And if he thought it was a good thing to chase, then we do what we could to get behind it. But if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out.
Exactly.
We'll make other arrangements.
I agree, Jack. Exactly. It's all about them. So it's what they want, because we have other options. We have other options. Okay.
So if I
Mr.
might,
Chairman,
Yes.
I'm going to defer to John Eggerson on this to refresh my memory, but we just went through this with our Rules Committee last month, and we heard from our Commissioner of Revenue. And John, I can't remember what she was saying as far as third-party involvement in this, but I think that she was against that. But I think it was not from a regional standpoint. It was more from an exclusive standpoint from our county on that topic. Can you ad-lib on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Deal. The Commissioner of Revenue is very active in the Commissioners Association, and they've got their own fairly strong opinions on how this should work. But the bottom line was she wasn't opposed to a regional approach. She also wasn't opposed to doing it, just county by county. She had no issue standing it up, but they were very much opposed to a statewide effort, which was talked about at the General Assembly. And, I don't think any of us want that. So as long as we're looking at a regional approach, if the Culpeper County Board of Supervisors decides they want to impose a tax, I'm in agreement with the whole discussion here today that it's worth Patrick looking into. But if it's not something that benefits this commission, we have other avenues from Northern Virginia down to Charlottesville. And I haven't talked to Mr. Hively about the town at all, but that's a conversation I probably need to have as well.
Okay, so I guess maybe report back, Patrick. I don't know if people are going to do something before April, but timeline-wise, are we okay looking into it a little more and reporting back in April, or is that too much too long?
No, I think what I would say is I can pull something together before then. If I would suggest maybe sharing it back to executive committee and also the chief administrative officer, just for them to have it rather than have to bring it to the full board, unless that's the desire of everyone here.
Right. No, I appreciate that, because it seems a little too timely to wait for a bi-monthly meeting, our next one. So that sounds good. Okay, I think we're ready to move on. Next is a report from the nominating committee. Last time the commission tasked the executive committee with serving as a nominating committee to identify candidates for chair, vice chair, treasurer, and at-large executive committee for one-year terms beginning March the 1st of 2021, which is right upon us here. Prior to asking for the nominating committee report, item 12A was added to the agenda based on executive committee discussion. The recommended amendment to the bylaws is outlined in the memo and would formalize the addition of the immediate past chair as a named member of the executive committee in addition to the other officers. The suggestion is based on similar structure in other regional and statewide organizations, as well as to ensure that the executive committee carries over institutional knowledge. Also, as outlined in the memo, an amendment to the bylaws is to be presented at today's regular meeting, but is not to be acted upon until the next regular meeting in April. If there is discussion about the proposed amendment, I would welcome it now.
Mr. Chair, I would note that Mr. Curry from Rappahannock County is not here, but he did question about the past chairman maybe needing to make a note that in some cases, if the past chairman is no longer on the commission, either just by virtue of which locality they represent or something else, some notification or notation here that the past chair would only serve if they were still a member of the commission, I think was his concern in not introducing a non-commission member onto the executive committee.
Right. In fact, we could word that for I don't know, qualifying past president or just say past president, and then with that qualifying phrase. But yeah, certainly, obviously, all of us have to be in a position as a member of the commission. We have to be a member of our boards. So, right, of course. And, you know, I mean, is anything mentioned like that for our president?
For the
chairman?
I think, you know, generally because of the chair and vice chair and treasurer, I think the information for those outlines that they have to be a member of the commission at the time. They can, I mean, there's definitely inclusion in the
Bible. Oh, because we're not defined, because the past chair is not defined at this point, like they're defined. I see.
Right.
Definition of those. Okay, I see. Then what we would need to do, as well as add that to the executive committee, we could, under the sections where they're defined, then I think we would need to also define and add that to this, and this we're mentioning it at this meeting to act on next meeting. It would make sense that the same place treasurer, chair, and vice chair is defined, that be defined as well, and that would take care of this issue, defined the same way. You know, okay. Qualifying past chair. Any other comments on that? It just seemed prudent, and I don't think anybody on the executive committee disagreed. Anybody else have a comment before next month? Okay. Moving on to 12B, Mr. Hobbs. Jack, will you share the slate of officers and executive committee members to be recommended to the board?
Yes, sir. The nominating committee, which is the executive committee, met. I was not at that meeting, and so it seems like I got delegated with delivering the message, and here it goes. So for expediency, I would nominate as chair, beginning March 1, Megan Taylor from the town of Culpeper, Paul McCullough as vice chair from Fauquier County, Greg Woods as treasurer, town of Orange, Fred Caitlin, town of Washington for the executive committee, Bob Corner, town of Gordonsville for the executive committee as past chair, and myself from Madison County on the executive committee. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd put that in form of a motion to nominate.
Thank you, Jack. Is there a second?
I would second it.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Didn't want to rush it through there. Hearing none. Do you think we need a roll call vote for that, Patrick?
You know, always err on the side of caution, but if you feel like you can get it through voice vote, then I think it'd be fine too.
Okay, then we'll do, if it's clear, we'll go ahead and do it. Then I'll say all in favor of that slate, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Thank you. The opposition usually clarifies it more than the cacophony of noises that are hard to disseminate. Thank you very much. Now, one thing I did not do, and we've had a vote here. I'm sorry, but I have to at least bring it up to have someone speak up if they would. I did not ask. It hit me for further nominations from the floor. And in case somebody had one, but didn't feel they had the opportunity to throw another name out there, I'll reopen it back up again if it's necessary. So don't feel inhibited by the prior vote. I should have asked for further nominations. Are there any? Okay, just didn't want that to go by without being said. Thank y'all very much for that. Now we're to the regional roundtable. I believe we'll get this under the 2-hour normal range for the meeting. To follow up on the December meeting, I'm pleased that both the town of Washington and the town of Culpeper indicated interest in pursuing the Living Towns planning workshop in the future. And again, look forward to getting those dates scheduled. I'll just say again, for the ones that may not have been there, boy, we had some wonderful planning sessions in this planning workshop back in the past on Saturdays. Not just us, the people on the commission we see all the time, but representation throughout our boards, throughout the region, representatives from other boards, planning commissions, supervisors, town councils, news media, usually lots of news media, maybe 2 or 3 different television networks, lots of radio, newspaper reporters there, lots of coverage, lots of PR for what we do, lots of PR for planning the region. We all get to talk and work together all day long and bond. It was a wonderful event. And the only reason it stopped was because we kind of all did it. We kind of hit all the topics we could hit at that time, and we just didn't want to get repetitive and stale. So we paused. Now, I don't think when we paused, we wanted to pause as long as we did. You know, things happen, you kind of forget to take it back up. But I can tell you that when we were doing that, it was a wonderful event, well attended, and I look forward to doing it again. So, Patrick, if you'll lead us through the roundtable by jurisdiction, we'll move to the end of the meeting.
Sure. Let's go north to south. Ms. Schaefer, town of Warrenton. Got anything?
Muted, Brandy. There you go.
Sorry, I'm trying. I keep clicking. I have multiple screens, and it just gets me messed up. So I apologize. I don't have a lot to report up here in Warrenton for the roundtable today. I really do appreciate Patrick coming to our last meeting and giving the presentation on the regional housing study. I do feel that was very informative to the council to understand not only what's going on with housing, but where we fit into the region and the role we're playing. So I did appreciate the extra time he took with the council. They had a lot of technical questions, a lot of things that they wanted worked through, and Patrick did a great job answering them. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. I know council really valued that report and the additional time you took with them. But as far as things going on here in Warrenton, we're just kind of trucking along like everyone else in the middle of the budget and the vaccinations with the county and working through things. But again, just wanted to say thank you to Patrick today for his time and effort with the council. I really appreciate that support.
Thank you. It was good. They did have a lot of questions. I will confirm that. Mr. Butler, Fauquier County.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Patrick. I'll be brief. Ms. Schaefer's being a little modest today, so I'm going to put the spotlight on her for a second. I really want to thank her and the town for their efforts in keeping our winter farm market going. It's been a huge success despite the crazy weather that we've had on the weekend. The winter market has been well attended. And even during the recent hail and sleet storm a couple of Saturdays ago, people were in line for one of our favorite food vendors. So hats off and a huge thank you to the town of Warrenton for working with us, alongside us to get that going. And like she also mentioned, the vaccination, the town and the county have joined up and are rolling out the vaccinations pretty steadily. It's been a great effort. Did want to inform or update the commission that Mayor Billingsley of Remington passed away on January 24th, and myself, along with Delegate Mark Cole and Delegate Mike Weber, will be giving memorial proclamations to the family at the town of Remington's March meeting. If you all did see the front page of the Fauquier Times last week, we have finally gotten where we want to be with the river access on the Rector track in Remington. If things move like we anticipate, we should be able to get in the river on the Remington side, hopefully by late spring or early summer. And that is all that I have to share. I won't steal Mr. McCullough's thunder on our upcoming budget session.
Mr. McCullough, go ahead.
I'm due to release my proposed budget this Friday in informal consultation with members of my board. It will not include a tax increase. It's basically a stand pat budget for this year. I will be talking to the board about a potential increase, however, to compensation if the board chooses to do so. That would be based upon whether or not we have sufficient revenue that would come in, or growth coming in from the reassessment, general reassessment that we're in right now. So I don't expect a lot of livelihood at the budget hearing, and we wait to see what the state says about what type of raises it may fund local teachers and state-funded local government workers. So that's it from that end. In addition to the Rector Track kayak and canoe, we did get final approval on the design for the kayak and canoe feature up at our Rappahannock Preserve Park in northern Fauquier. So we hope within a within a very short time, we'll have both of those online and available to the public. That's it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Donahue, Rappahannock County.
She's muted. There we go.
I apologize. My internet is horrible. So quickly, I will tell you, we had our first broadband authority meeting and are very excited about trying to get connectivity throughout the county of Rappahannock as quickly as possible. But I'm sure all you know, it's quite difficult for a small rural county such as Rappahannock.
Thank you. Let's see. Mr. Deal, Culpeper County.
Yes, I'll go ahead and defer to our county administrator, John Eggerson, on such things as broadband, solar, the budget that we've been working on. But I would like to say that if anybody knows a contact person on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, I encourage you to contact them about the revenue sharing program that's been deferred until 2025. Because my contact on there states that VDOT has come up with $735 million, and there's a chance that we can bring that revenue sharing program back. If not now, within the next several years, and potentially, if it is 2 years down the road or later, that we could get surety from VDOT that the money will be there if we do use the funds. So if you know of anybody on the Commonwealth Transportation Board that is willing to turn that process around to get the funds available now or in a short period of time, please give them a call. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deal. Mr. Eggerson.
Yeah, so like everybody, we're in the middle of the budget, and without going into any boring details, it is a reassessment year for us. So notably, our property values in Culpeper County went up about almost 12.5% as a countywide average, and it was more than that for residential and less than that for commercial, industrial, and agriculture. But looking good on budget things this year. So looking forward to working that through with my board and having a little easier time than we did last year. Broadband wise, we're also working to try to serve all the underserved or unserved homes in the county. We've developed a partnership that my board will consider next week with All Points Broadband, and they hope to do a short-term wireless deployment followed by a longer-term solution with fiber to every home in the county. So we're working hard on that effort, and want to give a shout out to our EMS folks who are running our own call center now and making appointments like crazy and giving vaccines. And it's a good partnership with the hospital here in Culpeper, and of course, working with the health department. So those are the big ticket items for us right now. And I think Mr. Deal also mentioned solar. That continues to be an issue, and we're grappling with that as well.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, our incoming chair.
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned it last meeting or not, but recently in the past few months, the town of Culpeper has hired a new planning director, and also Joe Costello, who everybody knows from this commission, is also been brought on to our planning department. So we're pretty excited about having some folks back in there. And we also recently, the town purchased some land between the railroad tracks behind the depot and the National Cemetery, with plans still, up in the air as to what we're going to do with it. But we've started clearing the trees and debris and everything that's been in those woods for years. And it's changed the look of the downtown already. Even though it's kind of dreary wintertime, just being able to look down Davis Street and look into the National Cemetery and see the rolling hills behind the depot is kind of a neat sight. So looking forward to some future use of that space at some point. And, obviously today it's looking like spring is in the air, and taking applications for our farmers market, and looking forward to Restaurant Week this next week now. So finally things are looking up and people are getting back outside, and we'd like to see that in town. So.
Thank you. Mr. Hively, anything to add from the town? Yeah, I can't hear you, Chris. All right, tech issues. We'll get you next time. All right, Mr. Hobbs, Madison County.
Yes, sir. I guess to put things in perspective with this COVID-19 business, everybody's running these vaccination clinics. But you recall about this time last year, we were working on pre-COVID budgets, and I'm looking forward to next year's budget being a post-COVID budget. So we'll never really have a COVID budget, if that helps. But our big thing right now is working with our local service authority. We have a 3-county service authority with Greene, Orange, and Madison as members. And Greene County wants out, which has created all kinds of problems and conundrums for Madison. So that's going to be a big thing on our docket for the foreseeable future. Construction-wise, we have a lot of work going on at our county administration complex and primary school. And we are just now getting into the broadband business, looking at what's to be done, standing up an authority, all that planning stuff that I suppose the COVID crisis has exposed our weakness in that area. So we're finally motivated to do something about that in Madison County. So that's what I had, Patrick.
Thank you. Mr. Woods, Town of Orange.
I would just say we're still working off of staggered shifts. We hope to come back as soon as possible because it really doesn't work that well. We'd like everybody else in our operating budget. We always have new things coming up we got to deal with, such as this morning. I got an email from a fellow who's claiming that town property, beavers have dammed up a creek on town property, and that's flooding his driveway. We don't know anything about it, but got to look into it. That's all I got.
Thank you. Mr. Crozier, Orange County.
Yes, since Mr. Voorhees bailed on me, I guess I do have to talk. Much like everybody else, dealing with a lot of the COVID and everything. And as far as our broadband goes, we
All right. We must have lost him. All right. Well, Mayor Corner, I'll turn it back over to you then.
Thanks, Patrick. Gordonsville, the little town with no money but big ideas. We've got to address things. You know, when you've got wonderful assets, but a small town, a small budget, people think of them as assets, but we all know they're liabilities because you have to maintain them if it's a sort of thing that runs in red ink. We're fortunate enough that we have an airport. Not too many towns have an airport. It's usually regional or certainly county, if not regional counties. But then it falls on us to continue to have an airport. We have a municipal pool. In most places, they're private clubs, unless it's a big city, and big cities will have municipal pools. We're a small town, we have a municipal pool. We feel if not, most of our citizens wouldn't be able to learn how to swim, wouldn't have access to a pool. So we're committed to it with a small amount of red ink. We hate to have a lot of red ink because we don't have the budget for it, but we do have the heart and the commitment to it. Point being, the pool should have been replaced about 30, 35 years ago. With a stretch 20 years ago. So that's how far it's been kicked down the road. Our airport, I'm not sure a plane could get lost in the cracks, but it would certainly disrupt it. The state doesn't want to just seal them at this point. They want to, of course, redo the runway, or we would seal it. So we're in for about a $3 million runway renovation. We're looking at a $3 million pool and park project. The pool and park project is a little beyond what we started out with the help of PEC. We have bought a property on the corner of the block our pool and playground is in to take over the entire block. We're working with VDOT to also take over a VDOT street that borders us to do 45-degree, or let them still maintain it and allow us to put 45-degree parking down both sides of that street so we can create 80 parking spaces. We've, with PEC actually, has bought 2 lots between the fairgrounds, the volunteer firemen fairgrounds, almost a tongue twister, is a block away from us. And they've purchased 2 lots in between the pool and playground and the firemen's fairgrounds. Both of them are large lots. Combined, it's quite a bit of green space that now winds through central Gordonsville. So we'll have quite a bit of green space for perpetuity in Gordonsville if this plays out. Obviously, the fund for the playground and the pool will be fundraisers and the like. Gordonsville certainly, we did put up money to purchase the playground from CSX. We put up money to buy that house to create the block. The town of Gordonsville did that. It's a Gordonsville playground, and we did that. To have the little more interesting expanded green space in town for those 2 lots, one of them had a house on it that was raised. We did not have the money for that and would not have spent to raise a house, but it does allow us to have a nice space going forward. But anyway, that'll all be raised money. So as it affects our budget, we're also hoping for a lot of 95% money for runway improvements. Unfortunately, because the Orange County gets the federal money for us, we don't get 95 or 97 or whatever the federal government puts in on these things. We do an 80-20 match with the state. So, I don't really like that rule, especially since we're like the second oldest airport in the state. But regardless of that, some of that money will have to be 80-20, which will be a hardship for us. But yet, it'll be quite an asset for us. The job that'll be completed for a couple $100,000. What really affects us, as you know, after financing is what do we have to pay each year? We'll finance it. So if we can put that $20,000 a year or $15,000 a year into our cash flow, having an airport is well worth it for us. It's also closer to the county industrial park. It's close to the vineyards, to Montpelier. It's close to, of course, us. It's right outside of town. So between tourism and industrial and economic development, it's a strong effect today. I will say that other than capital improvements, we do make a profit. We keep all of our hangars full. They're in demand. We'll probably double our hangar space. And, we get about $40,000 a year, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but it's more than our maintenance for it. So obviously any sort of capital projects are difficult for us, but our operations are doable. And we've moved our public works facility to the airport. So we've got a public works crew, on site there, which makes it a little bit easier to help out. I'll have hopefully some big economic development news for you folks in April, not at liberty to say today. So I'll move out of my roundtable discussion into my close off and adjournment. And I'll just say, besides being an honor to be your chair, since 2000, when I became active, I have a strong feeling about regional government and its place in Virginia, and it's the wonderful purpose that it serves for so many reasons I won't even list. I've also been active in the state group, and, although it's an honor to hold these positions, honestly, I just think of the pleasure it gives me because I really enjoy working at the regional and state level with these folks. So I'll bid adieu, and all best wishes to Megan. It's been a pure pleasure for me. And it was the first time. This is my second 2-year stint. The first time was about 12 or 13 years ago. I can't remember. It was 08 or 09 or something. I guess I did a couple of years. And I enjoyed it very much each time. And I love all you guys. I'll be glad to see you again in person. And y'all take care and stay safe. Get your shots. I know it's a personal decision, but get your shots. And see you folks in April. We stand adjourned.
Thank you, sir. And just to confirm, your previous term was March 2010 to February 2012. So
it was that recent. Oh, okay.
Yep.
It must have been vice chair when I was thinking of the 09 number or something.
Could have been.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah.
All those numbers.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
thanks,
good.
Brandy.
See you, folks.